What will our economy look like in a month? In a year? In a century? In today's world, I feel like it's impossible to predict what it will be like tomorrow. However, almost a century ago, the British economist John Maynard Keynes answered this question for us. And he answered it in a very optimistic way. He predicted that by 2030, mankind will have solved its economic problem, meaning that we will all live in economic abundance. He predicted that by 2030, we would finally be free to enjoy a life of leisure and to pursue what he called the art of living. Looking at our economy today, we see that we're far from realizing this situation. Both the 2008 financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis left our economies in chaos. Rampant unemployment, deepening inequalities, and stagnating levels of economic growth are now characteristic features of our current economic climate. Not only have we failed to solve our initial economic problem, but we have also created more global crises. Climate disruption, biodiversity loss, and the rapid depletion of scarce resources are now standing as serious threats to global civilization. Looking at our economy today, we see that our current system of economics won't allow all of us to live a good life within the natural boundaries of our planet. Somehow, we have to confront the idea that our current paradigm of development needs revision. We have to confront the idea that we can no longer afford economics as usual. Looking at our economy today, we see that what really prevents us from moving forward is the persistence of conformity and the lack of creativity in building alternative economic solutions. And this is why stimulating creativity in order to reinvent our economic model stands today as the most pressing challenge to achieve sustainable development. It's clear we need to build a green and fair economy. It's clear we need more competent economists in dealing with social and environmental issues. But how do we do this? Where should we start? What will be our leverage point to make real change happen? I come to you today to tell you that we should start from the beginning. We should start in the classroom, because the economic students of today are the economists of tomorrow. My idea is simple and very French. We need a revolution in economics education. We need a revolution because the way we're currently educating economists is failing to address the new challenges of global society. And because I'm challenging you to think differently, I ask you to spin the question around. How would you educate economists if you wanted them to be absolutely incapable of addressing the complex challenges of sustainability? Well, you would probably give them one worldview told as an absolute truth, constrain their imagination, discourage critical thinking. You would probably try to make them feel devoid of passion and powerless. And if you're lucky, they will not even complete their education, because they will have died of boredom long before that. You would basically teach economics something like this. This is a postcard made in 1910 by Jean-Marc Coté, a French illustrator. It depicts his idea of what education would look like in the year 2000. Look at it closely. What do you see? An old professor grinding dusty books into the heads of apathetic students, wired in one by one, literally being fed knowledge. Wait a minute. Feels a bit like déjà vu. Sadly, I think this illustration is not very far from the truth when it comes to current economics education. The problem is that we teach economics in a very narrow-minded way. Narrow-minded in 4 crucial aspects. Theory, the ideas of different economists. Methodology, the tools economists use. Discipline, the use of different branches of knowledge. And pedagogy, the way of teaching. So number 1, theory. What's wrong with theory? Did you know that students are mostly being taught only one theoretical perspective, what we call in the field neoclassical economics? So this is a problem for two reasons. First, a single theoretical framework is simply not enough to understand the complexity of the economy. But most importantly, it locks students into a business-as-usual way of looking at economic issues. It prevents critical thinking and innovation. It only engineers the replication of old models of thinking. You could even call it indoctrination, because behind every theory lies an ideology. But why should students only hear one side of the story? Which side should that be? The dominance of one particular ideology in education is not only counterproductive in terms of understanding reality, it is also incompatible with the fundamental ideals of an open and democratic society. If we want to broaden the spectrum of possibilities in terms of sustainability, we need to cultivate a diversity of thoughts in economics. So number two, methodology. The first rule of economics is you do not question the methods of economics. The second rule of economics is you do not question the methods of economics. Instead of using mathematics as a simple tool to solve economic issues, we tend to teach it as an end in itself. Mathematics is great fun and extremely useful, but it should be used to the extent that it is necessary, no more, no less. Current economics education is upside down. We learn the tool of economics before we even think about what we should do with it. This breeds economists who end up looking at the economy in terms of numbers and not in terms of people. We educate economists by giving them this quantitative obsession. When I wrote my master thesis, I decided to conduct interviews because I thought that actually talking to people could tell me something that numbers could not tell me. And even still now, when I show my study to economists, they look at me like, interviews? Really? What next? Magic? Witchcraft? Voodoo? Every question needs its own methodology. Sometimes qualitative, sometimes quantitative, sometimes both. To build the new economy, we need to give economists a bigger toolbox, including interviews. Number three, discipline. How can you understand such a complex system as the economy by only looking through the lens of one discipline, economics? History tells us that economic crises are a fertile ground for extremism and war. Physics tells us that growth has all kinds of limits. Psychology tells us that we're not that rational after all. Philosophy tells us that money does not always buy happiness. And yet, those disciplines have vanished from economic curricula. Philosophy is a good example. Where is philosophy in modern economics education? It's gone. We have disconnected those two disciplines that in essence could not be approached independently. And in doing so, economics became this supposedly value-neutral quest for efficiency, when it was originally nothing less than the moral science of choice. We have forgotten that the fundamental question of economics is not how, but why. The connections between these different disciplines are fundamental in understanding the complexity of today's economy. To build the new economy, we will need economists who dare to work within an interdisciplinary framework. And finally, the most important one, pedagogy. As teachers, we should ask ourselves, what kind of human beings do we want to leave our classrooms? Because if you want to educate conforming, obedient, passionless students, then yes, lecturing for 5 hours on a dusty blackboard is probably the best way to do it. But if you want to make education a transformative journey of discovery, you will need to embrace a diversity of techniques. Techniques that will trigger students' creativity. Techniques that will make the learning happen. University education doesn't have to be about an old professor in a tweed jacket, a textbook and a multiple choice exam. creative essays, role play, game, experiments, group work, field trips. Those are the type of activity that will give students the skills we need to build a new economy. Critical thinking, system thinking, the ability to cooperate, the ability to not only think about the future, but to imagine the future. When Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth visited the London School of Economics after the financial crisis, she asked a simple question. Why didn't anybody see it coming? The economist, looking a bit panicked, I suppose, answered it was a crisis, a failure of collective imagination. Thank you, finally, thank you. A failure of collective imagination. The current crisis of economics is a crisis of imagination. And this is why we need to fix the fabric of economic ideas to allow ourselves to move forward. Because we are making economics unable to address sustainability challenges by teaching it in a narrow-minded way. If we want to create economists, we will look at the economy as more than just the efficient allocation of scarce resources. Economists will be truly able to address issues of social and environmental justice. Then we need to open up the teaching of economics on all 4 levels. Let's move away from abstract models and start focusing on the economy as a reality to explain and improve. Inside the classroom, it'll be more interesting. It'll be more exciting. Let me tell you something. It'll even be more fun, both for students and teachers. And outside the classroom, it will actually help tomorrow's economists to address the challenges of sustainable development. So, what will our economy look like in a century? Fundamentally, we don't know. And that's why we need a discipline of economics able to address and generate a diversity of possible options. That's why we should see education as a free space for imagination. We need to construct more resilient economies. And for that, we need to deconstruct the resilience of all paradigms of economics and education. We are the generation realizing that Keynes' prediction was wrong. And the ball is now in our hands. So today, I'm calling out to all students in economics, to the economist of tomorrow. I'm calling out to every one of you who feels there is something wrong about our economy. It's time to rethink the way we do economics. It's time to be bold and redraw the economy as if the paper in front of us is blank. It's time to show the world that imagination is not a scarce resource, but the way forward to a sustainable future. Thank you.